Hello, my name is Alan, and I am here tonight with Kellen, and we are going to review the new album by Fer de Lance. It's titled Fires on the Mountainside and is being released on Cruz del Sur Music on June 27th. Get ready for an epic album review.
Flames of revolution with mind and mind aglow. A new world surmounting and melt away the snow. The old forever reach.
Hello, folks, and thank you for checking out this review on heavy metallurgy. Kellen and I are here to talk about this new Fer de Lance album, which we're both pretty interested to check out. So, Kellen, how are things going, and how would you like to kick this one off?
Going well. The second collab here between Alan and I. Uh, this record, so Fer de Lance, newer band, I think, to the scene. I first became aware of them in 2022, I believe, when the Hyperborean was released on Acropolis Records. Um, and I really enjoyed the record. A newer band kind of coming to the scene. I was initially attracted to what they had to offer based on the sort of band members and the history within Chicago.
hmm Yeah, they've got a
So,
little bit of an all-star regional lineup there. These guys have been in a lot of projects for sure.
right. I don't know if you caught them, but I mean, Satan's Hollow was the one that I know has a really strong history. And then a younger band called Hitter, I was also familiar with. I think bands from Satan's Hollow have moved into I guess, a project that's not too prolific called Midnight Dice. But
Another good
all of them were
project.
kind of playing in this and a bit more of like a traditional and speed metal kind of sound
Yep.
from the Chicago area, and the Hyperborean comes around, and it is not that at all.
No.
But epic heavy metal from Cruz del Sur. Okay, you got like my foot in the door here. I am kind of interested, given the track record of the record label and some of the participants involved.
Agreed. Yeah, I've, given Cruz del Sur a little bit of a hard time in the past year or two. They've had some releases that didn't quite hit the mark for me, both in terms of the packaging and the sonics, but I'll still give them a try. And when I see Cruz del Sur has something from a epic metal band, it's going to get a perusal for sure. And this band did establish a really good track record with that debut, the Hyperborean that you mentioned. I also really liked that album.
So the Hyperborean for me also follows in terms of like the track listing, a little bit like Fires on the Mountainside. 'Cause you kind of get this opener and a big epic. The Mariner, I think, is the second track on that album. And it's, to me, it was a great sort of initial
Mhm.
introduction to the band. Here we kind of get the exact same thing on uh, Fires on the Mountainside. It opens here with a 13-minute sort of epic title track. It's a great way to sort of get to know their sound. So when you first heard them, like what were the, I mean, I know we're kind of talking about epic heavy metal casually, but kind of if we were to dial that in a little bit more, what would you say are the sort of the contributing factors to what makes up their brand of epic heavy metal?
Yeah, for Fer de Lance, in a way, I think they're really almost the quintessential epic metal band. They really stick to the slightly longer song lengths because you need time to build up that kind of epic vibe. It's hard to build the epic flair if you're keeping your songs like in the 3 to 4 minute range. So typically, bands in this style are going to let things draw out to like that 6, 7, 8 minute mark more often. They also tend to stick to more of the mid-tempo pacings, which differentiates them from, power metal or speed metal. These bands are in no hurry to weave their tale of sword and sorcery in most instances. And Fer de Lance really adheres to that mid-tempo pacing. They very rarely speed up to any kind of gallop. They never let the songs drag either, but they're very much adherents of, yep, we're just kind of marching along, nice and steady beat. There's not a lot of tempo shifts along the way. At first, when I heard the Hyperborean when it came out in 22, it took a little while to get into the album just because all the songs are, yeah, they're longer songs with kind of a similar pacing. So it takes a little while for them to sink in and differentiate themselves. But Fer de Lance do it really well by really nicely incorporating some different instrumentation along the way, whether it's just some acoustic guitar or a few other things here and there to help always kind of keep livening things up a tad and keep you interested so that it never becomes dull or monotonous. And they also have, their vocalist who, works in that kind of, deeper, more baritone register. Epic metal bands typically will have a vocalist who sounds a little different. Not bad, but they'll have a fairly unique or characteristic voice. And I think that's very much the case with Fer de Lance as well. Not a lot of bands are going for that slightly deeper, full rumble, but it will immediately make fans of the genre think of things like Wuthering Heights or Doomsword in the vocal delivery. So it's almost like Fer de Lance really just go down the list and they check most of the boxes of what you're going to want to hear in an epic metal delivery. What do you think, Kellen?
So I would mostly agree with that, and
Sure.
I'll have a slight variation on the pacing and some of the influences.
Hmm.
Um, I guess the overarching thing that I do want to get across though is this band may be from Chicago, but they are really trying hard to be from Greece. Like
I agreed. Yes, they do not sound like a Chicago band.
you know what I mean? Like I think it's if you would told me that they were playing alongside a band like let's say Battle Roar or um, another one, Wrathblade. Like those are bands that
Hmm.
are coming out of Greece that are doing this style, kind of that same sort of vocal presentation.
Yep.
Um, but they are, I mean, a lot of the acoustics that you get on this record, I think also are trying to really delve into that world,
Hmm.
meaning they want to create not just sort of a garden variety epic heavy metal sound. The mythology, some of the lyrical content that they are sourcing from is specifically Greek, or
Hmm.
and that is a haven for so much of what epic heavy metal has to offer. Not just in the bands, but also sort of the history, right?
Yeah.
Um, so to Alan's point about checkpoint, like okay, referencing Greek mythology, like the bands that we are sort of inspired by, often are coming from that Mediterranean sort of area, right? Doomsword being an Italian band, so um, that's one thing about their sound. Two, and I wonder what Alan will have to say. I was saving this because I want to get a real time response to this.
Sure.
Is they remind me in this regard to Atlantean Codex is that their strength has to do with the collective sort of contributions of the band. Meaning, I don't think there's a single one element that defines them, but it's sort of this wall of sound with everyone sort of adding in that I think is an inspiration from a band like Atlantean Codex. So I know that might be a hot spot here, but the vocals are very different. I think some of the stories and the lyrics are very different. Obviously, a different label, but I do think sort of that is something that Fer de Lance is reaching for in their sound.
Hmm.
Is especially on this record, there's the developments that they make have to do with the number of different influences. Alan mentioned acoustics, but organ is a major presence on this
Yep.
record. I think the continual use of backing vocals on this, just it feels like there's a lot of things are stacked on top of one another.
Hmm.
And what I think a band like Atlantean Codex serves to do is offer up a sound that is like at a very high sort of echelon of not just doing a predictable epic heavy metal thing, but how powerful can we get this to be if we all sort of combine to this enormous sort of entity that's, offering up their music. So I do think that it's something that Fer de Lance is reaching for.
Hmm.
And for fans who potentially are drawn to that, they may like Fer de Lance on here on Fires on the Mountainside. The vocals, though, are a clear departure. I think they sound very different.
Oh, yeah.
So I was interesting to get your thoughts on that, given how much you like the band, Atlantean
Mhm.
Codex I'm talking about here, and where you see is like a major point of differentiation between the two.
The strength of stone crumbles in fate.
Yeah, those are really good points, Kellen, and I would agree overall. And it is something, some of the things you highlighted right there are things I would agree that help kind of set Fer de Lance a little higher up the tier than a lot of epic bands. First off, I agree that, yeah, they're drawing some inspirations from different types of mythology and such. One thing that does get under my skin sometimes with a quote unquote generic epic band is when they just keep going back to the same source material. It's like, Conan, sword, sorcery. Conan, sword, sorcery. Ooh, let's spice it up with a Moorcock reference. Like nobody's done that for the past 40 years. Those are fine, but so many bands have gone to that well so many times that it doesn't really feel inspiring anymore. Fer de Lance doesn't feel that way. That, yeah, they're drawing in some ideas from other source materials, and that makes it feel a lot fresher. You don't feel like, okay, yeah, here we go once again. Which one is Conan decapitating this time in this song? So I like that. And I really like your point about them developing this wall of sound. That's something I've seen other people reference when talking about Fer de Lance, is that, as you said, they stack things vertically. There's a lot of layers to it, but it all synchronizes extremely well. They're all working towards the same goal. The individual musicians are all very good, very talented, but they are working together to create something that's, bigger than the individual parts. They really do want the song to have, multiple things going on, all coming together and creating this kind of, yeah, wall of sound. Uh, Sorry, Phil Spector. I know you've probably got that copyrighted, but whatever. And yeah, Atlantean Codex does that kind of thing too. And I think that's something that helps, again, separate the run of the mill epic bands from the ones that really get it because they're baking that epic nature into how they write their songs. They're not just relying on the lyrical content to make it epic. A generic band might just write a pretty standard traditional heavy metal song and try to make it epic because they use, the word, Hyperborean 5 times per verse. A band like Fer de Lance or Atlantean Codex, they're writing the songs so the bloody music feels epic. They don't have to say a single word, and this would still be epic sounding heavy metal. So yeah, those are really good points. Agree completely on those.
Okay, and the second one I would say is, I've been talking a little bit about Greece. There's a slight tinge to me of heavier metal in their sound.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I think the probably the first place I went is going to go is sort of the Greek black metal scene. Um,
Hmm.
and there's a choices in terms of some of the guitar work. If you get into the opening track, somewhere around the 7 minute mark, right? This thing's 13 minutes
So
long, so we're
barely in the
seven
middle.
minutes
Yeah.
in, and but there's a decided shift in tempo, and the guitar work sort of works in concert with sort of the drumming here, and the song just kind of takes off. And I think, if you talk about the Greek black metal scene, it's always been one that has incorporated a deeper sense of melodicism that probably was
Mhm.
closer to older forms of heavy metal. It was a unique sort of feature that Riding Christ and Verathron sort of included in some of
Yep.
their songwriting. And I think, just like if you would listen to Cirith Ungol's 100 miles per hour, or another one that sort of comes to mind for me is Manamore's Kill with Power. Like,
Mhm.
these are bands that are, yes, epic heavy metal bands, but by the mid 80s, they're kind of feeling the temperature of what heavy metal is becoming and including that in their records. To me, Fer de Lance is one who's sort of, A, because I've identified being sort of a Greek inspired band, but two, like, they know in the greater world of heavy metal what's out there, and the fact that they're sort of choosing to sort of quietly include this. It never feels like an
Mhm.
overbearing presence or like a very deliberate attempt to include it. But I think if you're patient to your listening, you'll notice that they are slightly interested in including that sort of an influence, specifically with the guitar technique.
Yeah, that's another really good point, Kellen. I think a lot of epic metal does kind of grow out of traditional metal landscapes. I think those genres are relatively close together, so it makes sense that a lot of epic bands are going to have some traditional heavy metal bones within their skeleton. It also makes a lot of sense for Fer de Lance, like we talked about at the beginning. These musicians have worked in a lot of projects before. Chicago has a long history of really good, solid traditional heavy metal. Some of these guys have played with bands like Smolder. They've played with High Spirits, for example. So they definitely have that in their repertoire. So it doesn't surprise me at all that some of that does come through in the music here at all. It's an interesting point about the Greek black metal comparison that I hadn't thought about, but it's interesting. And yeah, there's definitely sort of a parallel there. I think you make a good case for that for sure.
It was a weird thing. I remember, I think the track on Hyperborean is Ad Bestias. I think it's the third track there.
Hmm.
But I first came along that track and thought there's something else going on here. Um, but because the vocals don't mirror it, the production's very smooth and warm. Like it's
Hmm.
apart from what I think people would associate with more extreme genres. So it's subtle, the inclusion in it, but I think it is worth noting that for people who may listen to moments on this record and hear something a little bit different than just your normal sort of epic fare.
Good points. Shall we get into the track list a little bit and see what things we'd like to point out about these songs? You mentioned
Yeah.
it starts with the title track, which is 13 minutes, just barely misses the 13-minute mark. It's at least 4 minutes longer probably than all the other songs, have a pretty normal, running length. But yeah, they open it up right away with the big grand number. What's your impression with the opening track? It being, sort of, the epic length track as well.
Um, I guess going back to Hyperborean, it kind of made sense. Like this is something that I should probably look forward to. Like it may just be a staple for the band. We're gonna put the big epic number right up in front.
Hmm.
I don't know how I feel about that. Like if this, when you're putting together a track listing, if this would have served better to be sitting on the back end of the record to sort of end things, but the track's good, like a good, I have no real complaints with it, I would say. It just is an interesting choice. So I don't know how this record would have played out had they rearranged this to be sort of a climactic end or something like that.
Hmm. I
Um,
have very much the same reaction to it. It's a good song. There's not a thing wrong with it. It builds nicely. They add all these extra kind of layers of things to it. But I'm not sold on having the lead track be 13 minutes and then every other track later in the album be 6 to 8 minutes. Because again, this band, they're working within a certain framework on all these tracks. And so it almost feels like they hit you like, blam, here's our master statement right out of the gate. And every song for the rest of the album is going to be in the same vein. It's trying to accomplish the same thing, but in a much smaller package. And in a way, I think it almost undercuts some of those later tracks from feeling as epic as maybe they should be, because you've already sat through, the long version, and now it's like you're almost getting the abridged versions of it. It's similar to like watching Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings. I was like, okay, 3.5 hours of Return of the King. If you then go and watch the 30-minute baked down version of it, it's like, okay, same story, but just it can't build the same way.
yeah.
And it didn't impact me the same way on the Hyperborean. Yeah, the Mariner as track two is definitely meant to be one of the signature tracks, but it's not noticeably longer than many of the other tracks on the album. And double checking the track list, but let's see, what do we got here? The Mariner is 8:16, but it's followed by a 7-minute track. Then there's
Right.
another 8+ minute track, two of them back to back, and then the closer is almost 11 minutes. So while the Mariner is a highlight on the album, it doesn't overshadow the other songs in terms of the running length of the song. And you do have that effect on Fires in the Mountainside. In fact, after a couple of spins, I rearranged the tracks on this in my playlist and would put Fires in the Mountainside at the end. I'm like, let me hear the other songs first because I feel like I'm not paying as much attention to them. They're overshadowed a bit. And for me, at least, I do like it better with Fires on the Mountainside coming at the end of the playlist. I think it allows the other songs to shine through a lot better. And it may be cliche, but it does feel like it builds up to that big closing statement in a way. And maybe the band was trying to, yes, mix that up some, not do the predictable thing of end with the, large scale fantasy opus. But I think it does. I think it does fit much better at the end of the album. So good song, but yeah, maybe not the way I would have preferred they kick things off. But once we get through that, then we get into some songs with more of a normal running length. Any highlights that you'd like to point out from the other tracks?
Yeah, so I actually really enjoyed the follow up here. And I guess so
Mhm.
Ravens Fly, Dreams of Daedalus. Once again, here we have a Greek reference.
Yep.
But what's cool about this track was, we've been talking about the way that they've incorporated sort of acoustics throughout the entirety of this record. This the Dreams of Daedalus, the moment where we actually get a dream on this. Um, I put it here in my notes. It's somewhere around the 3 minute mark. The actual sort of electric guitar work really just sort of slowly is almost like faded out in the studio. And you have just the vocals, some background, and sort of the drums driving underneath. It's almost this minimalist sort of echoed space,
Hmm.
but it meets sort of the demands of what I think the song would sort of insinuate, right? Like
Hmm.
this is we get the dream there, and it's an interesting way for them to sort of instead of you get used to a this long epic 13-minute sort of uh, super dense song. It's an interesting way that they withdraw, and it creates like a different kind of shift that I think meets probably with the story that we're being told, right? Yeah, so it's just a cool way to realize like I don't know if that acoustic guitar is playing throughout the entirety of the song and they just finally shut off everything else, going on.
Hmm.
It very well could be, but I do think it works well dynamically within the song,
Hmm.
meaning to get that sort of on-off switch before everyone comes back into the forefront and plays together. I just it was a standout moment in terms of knowing when less can be having it can have more impact in terms of your songwriting style.
Right. And it's another good example of something you pointed out earlier in terms of letting the music build to tell the story. That they actually write that section of the song to sound dreamlike because that's what's supposed to be happening in the narrative at that point in the song. They're not just relying on the words or the lyrics to tell you that it's a dream. It's a little bit reminiscent of like what Iron Maiden did with Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner in that long middle sequence where the music gets very quiet and very calm, and it's mirroring that part of the story where the ship is absolutely dead in the water with nothing to propel it forward. And you get that sense without really needing the vocalist to tell you that's what's occurring. So yeah, they did really nicely on that. I'd agree. It's a very cool song here.
All right. What about for you, Alan? What's another standout?
Let's see. Another one for me is we mentioned it briefly earlier, but the Feast of Echoes, I think, is a very cool one. And it's one that, yeah, right away in the intro, the organ becomes more prominent. And like you said, it's used throughout the album. But this is kind of the moment that, they get to kind of flex here a little bit, go into total John Lord circa 1984 mode. Yeah, you can almost just hear the chorus to Perfect Strangers somewhere in the background of the mix a little bit here. But it's the kind of little touch that bringing that to the front for this song gives it a little more of a personal identity, shows that, yes, there's these other things in here to notice too. We haven't been highlighting that all the time. This track gets to highlight that a bit. So it's a good intro for it. And I like the way the rest of that song plays out as well. It's a really good track for the back half of the album. All right, Kellen, anything else you want to highlight from maybe the latter half of the album?
Well, I would just agree on the Feast of Echoes point, but it's also the doomiest track on this record. I think in terms, it's kind of something that's been tossed around with this band. And while the genre that they navigate through in epic heavy metal has like at some levels a proximity to that, Feast of Echoes to me feels like the slowest, heaviest, and to your point, the organ really like amplifies that aspect of
Yeah.
the song. The sort of the stomp of that, with the inclusion just slamming in through the organ, it feels like 100% the doomier, slower track on this entire record.
I'd agree. Yeah, and Doom is the other genre that Epic, tends to lean into from time to time to really good effect, in my opinion, at least. So it makes sense that this song, could have a doomier feel and work just fine within the context of the album.
So the other one I really want to highlight is probably my favorite song on the record, which is "Children of the Sky and Sea."
Yes.
I mean, one, I'd be interested in terms of the track listing if you put Fire on the Mountainside as the closer, how this one sort of if it had a different effect. But for me, it feels like the most exultant, like the
Hmm.
chorus on this is the best one on the album.
Yeah.
It gets it right. The melody kind of rescues. You get in the verse, everything's kind of swallowing each other, right? You hear like the drum sort of pushing everything, but there's a lack of clarity. It's just how dense sort of the major verse riff is, and then it just sort of parts the clouds, right? And you get this
Hmm.
great melody that one chorus, you get the melody of the vocals, which are lining up right with that organ again. So there's a key presence, right? They're
Hmm.
working, together. Um, and just something about the phrasing on that, it feels like the most memorable.
Hmm.
And it just that great sort of release once you get to the chorus. I think it's the best moment on the record in terms of one that is memorable, one that I want to circle back to and listen to again. Um, they take the bridge of that moves into we haven't really talked a lot about the lead guitar work here, but
True.
just like we kind of talked about the organ having a prominent sort of connection, sort of following the verse or the melodies, there's a lot of very sort of single note lead guitar stuff that sits right along with that, right? They're sort of
Hmm.
lockstep often. And once we get to the bridge of this song, they sort of intertwine with one another. It's not fast or whatever, speedy, sort of shredding stuff. It's just
No.
hyper melodic, sort of memorable, sort of melody that goes throughout this entire song. I think it's probably the standout for me overall on the record.
Yeah, it's a really, really good one, if not the standout. And not only does it, again, it has the sort of, yeah, like you said, it's more of like a little more, triumphant sounding song without going overboard or being cheesy. It kind of mirrors, the narrative once again, children of sky and sea. It immediately makes you think that it should be something, that's really going to, open up. You've got, this endless horizon, and they're kind of playing into that with, the chorus being all of a sudden so clear and really opening up. And I like it following, the slower, doomier, denser Feast of Echoes. I think, the track listing there is really nicely done. You've got, this denser, doom-laden kind of track, and then you kind of bring it back up from there. It's like, you've done your underworld crawl, and now you get back to the surface. And yes, the sky, the sea, the horizon, it's your limit. You can go adventure in any direction you want to. And again, I want to highlight that they do all of these things on this album without ever sounding cheesy, which is something that epic metal bands can fall prey to if they're not careful. Fer de Lance is another strong selling point for them. It never comes across as corny or hackneyed or anything. They're not brandishing, some kind of, giant fake broadsword in their band pictures and wearing
Hey.
capes, and you can see their, dice bag, tucked in their pocket or anything. It's some dudes in leather jackets. Here's a
Right.
picture of us. This is what we play. It's, no kind of bullshit about it. It's very professionally done. Yeah.
They totally look like a Chicago band in terms you're right. The image
Absolutely.
they're trying
Looking
to
at
put
the
out there.
picture, you wouldn't peg
Yeah.
this as, oh, they're about to do this kind of, yeah, folky Greek influenced, epic metal whatsoever. You'd expect them to sound like maybe Super Christ or something, knowing they're from Chicago.
Well, that's all the two sort of big songs I wanted to bring up. Is there another one that you feel is worth mentioning here?
I think we've covered it. Again, there's only 7 tracks on the album, and we've picked it apart pretty well. The tracks we skipped Death Thrives and Fire and Gold in the middle, which are both fine. And then, of course, we close on Tempest Steel, which is a nice piece of music. I think it's, a pretty nice way. Again, it's got a little bit of a classy element to it to close out the album. Do you like it as the album closer, since we can't have the
You know,
13-minute
it's
track at the end?
interesting. I'm yeah, happy we at least stop to talk about them. So for me, listening to this record the first time around, Fire and Gold and Tempest Steel, I initially thought were just going to be sort of instrumental pieces.
Hmm.
And like I talked about, sort of this band very much wanting to sound Greek or Mediterranean, I do think the acoustic choices on these two songs in particular
Hmm.
drive home that motif more than anywhere else on this record. They are very much explicitly pulling, I think, just in terms of the scales that they're playing, the notes they're choosing. Those songs to me sound very much pulled from like Mediterranean sort
Yeah,
of guitar work, acoustic guitar work.
they
So
want that Mediterranean flavor on these two for sure.
I think that's was my initial impression. The fact that they sort of turned them into sort of shorter songs, like there's some substance there.
Mhm.
But I in some ways I almost feel like they're more touchstones that are meant to remind you of like thematically about what this band's about, more than like hallmarks on the record that you really need to return to.
Mhm. And that's fair, with all the other songs being, longer and having these big, grander structures. I think it works well for a band like Fer de Lance to have some tracks like that sprinkled in here and there, so that it's not just 8-minute adventure followed by 8-minute adventure followed by 8-minute epic adventure. That they include those kind of breaks here to give you a chance to catch your breath. For me, it's kind of a reset moment. It's like, okay, this is still a cool piece of music by itself, but it keeps the album from just having the tracks run together, one into the other, into the other. This is like a very clear point where I know where I'm at in the album now, and I'm ready to kind of go into the next big tale on the follow-up track. Except Tempest Steel, because it's at the end of the album. There is no follow-up track.
So I mean, we kind of talked about potential, like you would want to rearrange the track listing a little bit. Any other things that you think are worthy of, criticism or places to improve potentially?
um, if I have a couple of other nitpicks about the album, one is maybe just the fact that it follows what they did on the Hyperborean well, but maybe a little too closely. Sure, there are some, they're using a few different things here and there. You've got one member, has changed out, so it's not going to sound exactly the same. But at least on, the first few spins, it really was striking me as, Hyperborean Part 2, back to Samaria. um, Not a bad thing, because again, I like the Hyperborean. The band's very good at this style, so it works. But it did feel like, okay, they played this one kind of conservative in that regard, that, there isn't something that's going off and forging any new direction for them. The second thing I would say is the production for this is good. There are points throughout it, though, where I feel like the production's almost maybe a tad too clean. It's not like it's super sterile sounding or anything like that, but there are times where it's like maybe it could be roughened up just a little bit. That sometimes on choruses, such as with the title track, it comes across really really clean and clear. And epic metal is something that often does benefit from being just a little bit dingy. You need a little bit of that patina on the surface to give it the authenticity of age, because that's something that epic metal always plays
Right.
around with. And if it gets to sounding too clean, it maybe loses half a point somewhere along the line. It's a minor complaint. I don't want to overstate it. What do you
Yeah.
think, Kellen? Anything else that you wanted to bring up or follow up on those?
Um, I think it's an interesting point in terms of like navigating a different sort of world, right? If you
Hmm.
the Hyperborean back to Samaria, um, like I'd be interested to see if they try and explore um, a different part of history in order to for the next record. But I do think the point regarding the production, specifically for me, the melodic quality of it, I think the sound of this band kind of straddles two worlds, which is one, yes, the epic one that you're talking about. But I could imagine someone who's like curious about epic heavy metal that also listens to Pallbearer, to like sort of how smooth and melodic this band sounds.
Okay.
Meaning, and to your point about it's clean, it's modern, like I think there's something about the sort of guitar voicing here that to me does sound super smooth
Hmm.
um, and polished, and like that's one of the major things that's attractive about them is sort of their hyper melodicism, and they don't try and crust that up at all.
Hmm.
You know, I think this genre, like maybe any other heavy metal genre, is known for weird, wacky, underproduced,
Yep.
ugly, messy. Like it's the an interesting genre that has this long lineage of very strange sounding records, and you don't
Yep.
necessarily have to be uh, controversial in your production choices, meaning like notorious. Maybe is the word I'm looking for.
Hmm.
Um, you don't need Borkus Helm to put out like a quality epic heavy metal record, right?
Hmm. Yeah, or a lot of the Manila Road catalog,
Yeah, we
as
could go
much
down
as
the list, right? Like you
yeah.
keep bringing up bands it's known for. And I think they've chosen very deliberately a very modern approach to guitar sound, to how much they want to include melody. Like I mentioned, all that sort of lead, sort of single note guitar portion to this record, I think is a big part of the attraction.
Hmm.
And I think, when I think of a band, I'm using Paul Bearer as an example of sort of heavy melodic bands that are very popular right now.
Hmm.
Um, and I think this record, I could say, just in terms of the production choices, mirrors a lot of the same qualities for me
Yeah,
personally, at least when I
it's
hear this.
it's a fair point. I mean, it's if you're not careful, you get in a catch 22 where if they make it sound like you said too rough around the edges, people will pounce on that and complain about it. But yeah, when you start cleaning it up, then here I am kind of nitpicking. It's like, could you make it just a little bit dirtier sounding? And again, I want to emphasize, I think it maybe just needed a little tweak at the edges. It's not a major sticking point at all. I think it came up because I've also been listening to Hooded Menace lately. And, over the course of their albums, Hooded Menace, kept getting
Yeah.
cleaner and cleaner and cleaner sounding. And by the time you get to like the Tritonus Bell, I think they got so clean that they kind of lost their core sound. I can't get into that album because it is way too clean compared to what they had done, earlier on some of the albums. And you can hear it along the way with the one with multiple O words in the title, Ossuary Obscurity, Ossuarium, oh something or another.
Sure.
On that album you can kind of hear they're like right on that tipping point of like, okay, it still sounds good, but man, you've cleaned it up a lot since the first album or two, and they kind of kept drifting that way. I wouldn't want Hyperborea Fer de Lance to keep drifting to a cleaner and cleaner sound, but no, I think they're still in good shape here, and that's a good point on your part. By making it cleaner, it may have more appeal to folks that don't want that slightly underproduced sound to it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if like that's how much of that is Fer de Lance or how much of that is Cruz del Sur or who's making the
Right.
um that choice, but I think it's going to be potentially polarizing for fans of the genre. Um, I think for some people who as may want, hey, I like your baritone vocalist, but can you mess up the production a little bit more, make it a little bit. I need some dust coming off your temple rocks. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
I think it's just an interesting part to the band but I do find they, I don't know, it may be a very deliberate choice that they just want to pursue. So,
Could
um,
be.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean they're clearly trying to set themselves apart in other ways, like we talked about, playing down the generic sword and sorcery, playing up the more, yeah, Mediterranean and Greek influences, which aren't mined as much by epic metal bands other than the ones from that region. So the production could be another deliberate choice to be like, hey, let's make this sound a little different so that once again, we don't get lost in the never-ending sea of bands that are out there. We mention that a lot on Heavy Metallurgy these days. Bands have to do something, even if you're doing something, to make yourself stand out. It's not easy to get noticed. So sometimes you have to maybe take some risks and make some choices to help you get noticed in the crowd. And I've said it before in this review, and I'll say it again. I think Fer de Lance, really do stand out among bands in the sort of epic subgenre. They are one of the better ones going for sure. Not my favorite, because there's a band that rhymes with Ballantine Modex, but yeah, Fer de Lance is pretty high up the ladder.
Yeah, like I think just for, comparison, um, last year you had other bands, let's say Altar of Oblivion came
Hmm.
out, right? But they also have sort of a very unique, sound to them. I'm trying to think of other bands that are sort of currently playing in the space. Um, I don't think this band is trying to be the next Visigoth or the next Eternal Champion.
No, they're
Um,
not. Definitely
this
not.
is they have their own thing going on, and um, probably that's why back in 2022 they sort of piqued my interest, at least enough to sort of entertain when this next record came around. One, I liked your first, the first full length that they had. Um, Two, where are they going to go? Because they don't sound like a predictable, to your point, a
Hmm.
predictable sort of, you know,
Yeah.
attempt at this world.
Yeah. And I hadn't thought of it that way, but with you saying that, maybe that's why it bothered me slightly that this album was so similar to Hyperborean, because they are a band that feels like they can do a lot of different things. And the fact that this one more or less, did the same thing, maybe it was like a little bit of like, oh, you know, and maybe it's, maybe we're one album out where they still are trying to establish a solid base. And, the next one, they, incorporate something that's a little more radically different. But again, that's a fine line for any band to tread. Make it too different. You lose all the fans you already had, and you don't necessarily attract a new fan base by doing that every time either. But no, coming from kind of the same place you are, the debut was very interesting. It stood out. Was really excited to see if they had another album come out. And I think they've delivered pretty well here. So, where do we stand on Fires on the Mountainside here with some closing thoughts?
I mean, right now it's going to be difficult to unseat. 'Cause this we were, talking about prior to recording this. This has been a solid year for some more traditional heavy metal stuff. For
Hmm.
me, it's going to be difficult to pull Vulture's Vengeance off my top epic release for the year. But
Hmm.
I guess where I will kind of close on this in terms of a final opinion is to some level, I kind of feel like the momentum that existed in this sort of world of heavy metal, younger bands playing this stuff, that was alive and well in a decade ago,
Hmm.
2015, 2016, has started to slow. Um,
Hmm.
and in spite of that, I feel like this band is still a greater runway to pursue. Meaning, they come to this third record, it's promising still. I feel like they haven't exhausted sort of all the different sort of avenues for them to explore artistically. So, third record, I think if you liked the first one, you enjoyed Hyperborean, you will enjoy Fire on the Mountainside. Two, I still think there's places for them to go, and I'll be tuning in when their third record comes out, if it does.
Yeah, I kind of agree too. I think this is similar to some of the other standout bands from recent years, where I think this is a good album. It's a good follow-up to their previous one, but I think they've got room to still improve. There's nothing wrong with this album, but I think they can do even better next time around. So I was quick to get in line for the second album. I will be equally quick to get in line for the third album. Where this one falls in the context of this year's releases and such, I don't know. Yeah, there's been some really good stuff and interesting stuff come out early this year. This year felt like a lot of bands put something out really early and did a good job with them. This one has kind of stood out here for like, the late spring and early summer releases, but where it ends up falling overall, it's way too early to say. But yeah, Fer de Lance, definitely a band worth keeping an eye on. I will definitely see where they go in the future. It's going to be interesting to see. I do hope that they don't just keep sticking to this one style. I think they have too much potential to make the Hyperborean Part 3, Return of the Cimmerian. We don't need them to do it every single outing. At the same time, yeah, we don't need them to go make, a Blackened Mallcore album either, don't get me wrong. But that's the thing. The future is wide open, and they can go in whichever direction the sea and sky might take them. Well, that's going to do it, I think, for this review here on Heavy Metallurgy. Kellen, as always, it's lots of fun tackling these albums together with you. Folks have really enjoyed the dual album reviews, where it's not just one of us reading a book report to the audience. So, yeah, thanks as always for inviting me along and helping do this together. It's always a blast.
Yeah, I had a good time. The perfect person to collaborate for this one. I knew that you had listened to the previous record, so when the opportunity came up, jumped on it. It was a lot of fun.
For everybody out there, please keep an eye on Heavy Metallurgy. We'll have more album reviews throughout the year. We've got our Wednesday album clubs and Friday night live streams. Lots of good, fun, heavy metal content for everyone. And there's also the Heavy Metallurgy Discord. You can jump on there and interact with other members of our community pretty much anytime you feel like it. But that's going to do it for this review. Signing off. And as always, everybody, take care and keep banging your heads.